Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Going Nuclear. Here with a very special guest, Neil Alexander. And Neil is a communicator, and also Neil is the head of communications for the Canadian Nuclear Society. And he does some incredible work promoting nuclear, as well as having some very, very interesting discussions on topics. So let's dive right into it. Deep geological repositories. Neil, when it comes to nuclear waste, there's a lot of interesting ways in which a message can be sent out to the audience. Nuclear waste is a very interesting topic because people feel very strongly about it. And sometimes when we're communicating, there's ways to communicate in a very technical way, sometimes in a very subtle way, so in a very soft way. And it's a balance, it's a dancing act. And so I wanted to talk to you about what are some effective communication strategies for talking about this topic.
Great. I'm going to pick you up on one thing right from the start, and that is that as my role in the CNS, we don't promote nuclear technology. We educate people about it. And I think there is a very important distinction. Um, Obviously, the anti-nuclear people are always going to complain and say that you're promoting it, even when you just talk honestly about it. But we do have this first line that our objective is to talk honestly, and that is what we do. And so we're not there to try and sell the idea. We're just there to tell people about it. And I think, one of the things that I've always really been interested in is repositories, right from the early days, really like the high point of nuclear communications, because it is probably one of the hardest topics to talk about. And I think, as I've watched some of the responses to people, I've developed some ideas that might be a little bit controversial, but I think are worth discussing. And I think to get them out in the open and start talking about them. And my big issue is that I believe that when we talk about 100,000 years or 1 million years, we are actually making things much worse for ourselves than if we were just honest and said, we are going to be putting the used nuclear fuel away and locking it out of the environment forever. Now, you might come back and say, well, forever is a lot longer than 100,000 years or 1 million years. So aren't you making it worse? And my argument is this, that if you look at the way people actually write about the issues that are against repositories, they seem to believe that in 100,000 years' time or 1 million years' time, the world is exactly the same as it is today.
Yeah.
And so they talk about the potential that radioactivity might get into the Great Lakes. Well, in 1 million years' time, the Great Lakes are not going to exist. But they don't seem to have understood that. But if you talk about eternity, forever is never going to be a problem, then people recognize that the world will be different in forever than it is today. And they start dealing with the issue in a different way. So psychologically, you've moved them. And it's not an inappropriate movement because, in fact, we're not trying to put it away for 1 million years. We are trying to make sure it never has an effect on the lived environment. So we're actually making our case more positive by telling the truth about what we're trying to achieve. I also think it has another really helpful issue, and that is that when we talk about 100,000 years and 1 million years, what we're doing is differentiating used fuel from any other waste form that mankind has ever dealt with. When actually, we're managing it in exactly the same way that we deal with other things. And those other things, like if you look at a solar panels, a lot of them have cadmium in. Cadmium is a very, very nasty toxin, and it is toxic forever. It doesn't decay. And so now you are creating a very direct link between what we're doing, which is a positive, forward-looking, sustainable way of dealing with wastes, and what we currently do with other things that are equivalent, which is just basically dump them on the surface of the earth and hope they don't go away. So one of my big themes at the moment is to start putting forward the idea that we should stop talking about 100,000 years and 1 million years, start talking about forever, and perhaps do ourselves a favor in communicating about repositories.
I really enjoyed the comparison that you made, the logic behind how saying forever has a different connotation in terms of impacting our psychology
Yeah,
as humans. And when people hear forever, they're afraid, they get scared, right? But hey, at the end of the day, humans were extracting fossil fuels from the earth, which have been deposited by dinosaurs, right? Dinosaur bones, dinosaur like feces and stuff, right? Become oil. And so when you talk about forever, tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on future generations and their interactions with nuclear waste.
yeah. I think that's a very good question. We're talking about future generations. One of the things that it's difficult to talk about is that 100,000 years time, civilization as we now know it will not exist. We might be a more advanced civilization. We may be a less advanced civilization, but it will not be the same civilization we have today. Because people use lived experience in their decision making, the only lived experience they have is the lifetime they've led, which is the world they live in today, which is why we get this issue of projection. And one of the things I like to say to them is that there are two possible outcomes with regard to civilization. One is that we continue to improve for 100,000 years, in which case, if something did go wrong in the repository, it would be really easy to go in and fix it. You'd probably just say to your robot, develop a solution and go and implement it, and it will get done. So that's one outcome. The other outcome is that civilization collapses and we are no longer able to go in and fix it, in which case, aren't you going to be really, really glad that the repository was built when we could build it? And that, I think, is one of the really compelling arguments to say, now is the time to do it. We have the capacity, we have the engineering capability, we have the scientific capability, and we have the money, and we have the people, and we have the resources to go and get the job done. So we should do it, and we should do it now,
Yeah.
because nobody can find another answer, right? It's either this or it's that, and in both cases, what you want to do is get on and do the job. And a lot of the anti-nuclear argument is trying to find some middle ground where they're kind of waving their hands around what might happen, and to put it in black and white makes it very clear to people which way we should be going.
I do think we need the solution now, and the solution exists, and it's all about implementing it. Why don't we have more international global efforts when it comes to permanent disposal of nuclear waste? Instead of every country developing their own nuclear waste repository, why don't we just have one massive repository for all of the world's nuclear waste? There's not much of it. There's not much nuclear waste in the world. And if we have one repository and one management system and kind of like of a financial pool that's coming in and supporting that, wouldn't that be more of a pragmatic solution?
It's a lovely, pragmatic solution. If the world could come together to agree on anything, that would be a really great solution as well. So I think, the challenge we have is that the world is segmented into countries and groupings within those countries, and they all want to do things themselves. So it's not just repositories, it's pretty much everything that we have to deal with that with. But if you look at what's going to happen, as more countries, particularly as we see SMRs start to develop, they will start going into countries that it will make no economic sense for them to have a DGR. And I think at that point, countries will come together to say we will have a regional one that we will all support. And they will look to, like, I think we should be really, really proud of the program that we've run in Canada to select a site. Think it's been very clever, very well. Clever sounds, you know, it's been appropriate, I think is the word I was looking for, and well run campaign to actually put one in a place where the people want it. And I think that we should be proud of it, and we're going to see other countries and other groupings of countries as they develop their programs coming and looking at Canada to see what we did and how successful NWMO have been in their program.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think, yeah, I agree with you. I think Canada is a leader when it comes to uh, developing unique solutions to selecting sites. Back to the international collaboration piece, I think you brought up a really important point that may come a time when countries have a small modular reactor that's supporting them, but they don't have enough financial means to actually build a deep geological repository. And that's where the collaboration element will come in. However, when with nuclear projects, usually we always keep the end in mind. And so, do you think with this new nuclear revival, this renaissance with countries across Africa and many other parts of the world embracing nuclear, do you think that this idea of a collective deep geological repository will come into fruition sooner than later?
Well, sooner rather than later are two very poorly defined terms. So, no, I suspect it's going to take a while for people to come to that realization. I think and you know while forward-looking people may be, you know, setting the context for these plans, I think the more immediate challenge is that we find ways to help, particularly developing nations, adopt nuclear technology. And people are just like, why would you do that? Well, the fact is that carbon dioxide is entirely fungible. It doesn't make any difference whether it's made here or whether it's made in Africa or China or Australia. It's going to have the same effect on our environment. So it benefits us to help other nations be successful with their nuclear programs because it means that we can address the climate change issue much sooner. I think as people start to do that and more people grow comfortable with nuclear power, because um, one of the really interesting things, and I think we've talked about this before, one of the really interesting things about nuclear power is as you approach a nuclear station, understanding about nuclear power goes up and support for nuclear power goes up. Most other energy technologies, as understanding about them goes up, support for them goes down. So, particularly, I tell the story of wind and solar. It was very easy to support wind and solar when you don't understand them because they're nowhere near you. When they build one right next to you, which they've done with me, you really get to appreciate what you're taking on. So, so support for wind and solar goes down when you approach a approach a wind or solar station, but support for nuclear goes up. So it's all about understanding. So at the moment, people might say, that idea of having an international approach is quite worrying, but that's because a lot of people don't understand the issues. When everybody's got their nuclear power station, they understand what it's about, they grow comfortable with it. I think that then makes it much easier to move forward with a project like that.
Do you think the same rhetoric will apply to a DGR, a deep geological repository? If there's a host community with a DGR, do you think in the future those communities will actually be more supportive of nuclear as opposed to, for example, communities with landfills that are just like, why is this in our backyard?
I think that is a really good question. I think for people that actually understand what's going on, the big frustration is that we just need a demonstration project, because once it's demonstrated and people realize there are only economic benefits, the downsides are so minimal, so much smaller than any other project that would deliver the same economic benefits, then they'll go, oh, we want them, right? People will be going, we've seen it. I wish we could be picked. But because there is so much lack of knowledge, we have this energy barrier to get over of all these people that have been fighting it because they didn't understand it. And once it's demonstrated, like, when the NWO project is up and running, everybody will be supportive of it. The opposition will disappear because people will just grow comfortable. They'll see the jobs, they'll see that there is no consequence, and it'll become much easier.
Mhm.
I think Finland is kind of acting as an example now that one's actually been built and people can see it starting to operate. That level of trust is improving. It's got to have used fuel loaded into it. There's got to be more of them. but increasingly people will just see that happen.
This episode is being recorded live at the annual CNA conference, Canada's largest gathering of professionals from across the nuclear industry. If you want to know more about the association's work, please click on the link in the description below.
I love the pragmatism, and I think you do have some really good foresight. We are living in unprecedented times, I think, when it comes to nuclear energy at the moment. Like this turning point is significant, and it's like it's reached a criticality where nations across the world are embracing nuclear power. And with your comment about nuclear waste, if the first repository is successful, everyone will start to support it. In the past few decades, how has that narrative evolved? And where are we going in terms of this renaissance?
We've had false renaissances before, and I've been involved in them. And I used to give extensive numbers of presentations about the Renaissance, and then we had Fukushima and everything collapsed. So I think we have to be very realistic that as yet we have not built a reactor in the new Renaissance. And so it is still a frail opportunity. And I raise the issue because for the first time in a long time, people are listening to us when we talk about nuclear power. And it is a tremendous opportunity to go out and educate people so that if something goes wrong, and I don't anticipate another major accident, but one of the things that worries people is it might cost more than they expected. And I think now is an opportunity for us to go and educate them about the importance of doing it. And even if the first project does cost a little bit more, they shouldn't worry about it because it leads to an objective that is important to them. So I wake up every morning and I worry about the fact that we are building our renaissance on shifting sands. And what we ought to be doing is spending a lot more money on creating a foundation for the renaissance. And that bit seems to have been forgotten. Everybody's so excited about technology development and licensing and getting new projects in place that they've forgotten that we still haven't told people why nuclear is important, how it works, being honest with them about the risks and benefits so that we can build up a level of trust, not just in a specific community that's hosting a project, but a baseline of trust that would mean that if we change from one government to another, that the public still asks the new government to support nuclear power. And I'm very conscious because I lived through it very intimately with the Green Energy Act in Ontario. Wind and solar, very popular with the public. They didn't really understand the issues. It grew, and then suddenly it became unpopular. The government that did it was not only voted out of power, they ceased to be a party anymore. They lost so many seats. So we've got to make sure that we don't let that happen to nuclear, that we swap from one government to another because something went wrong that people didn't understand. We've got to build that platform so that we have constant support that will make that renaissance happen.
Do you think this renaissance will actually happen?
I think we can make sure it happens if we grab the opportunity to educate people while they are listening to us. I think while we avoid doing that, which I hate to say, I think is something that we're doing at the moment, that we leave it as a possible success rather than a guaranteed success. And I would like to, I don't like risk. I'd like to take that all away, build that foundation to make sure that there is no way that renaissance can be put at risk. But why I get passionate about it is it's not very expensive.
What's not very expensive?
Educating the public
Oh, okay.
is the cheapest part of any nuclear project, right? It is the smallest part. As soon as you start getting into bending metal and pouring concrete, that's when your costs go up. So why not create that foundation with very little money at the beginning that allows you to make certain that the expensive bits go get the support they need?
So how will we educate? Because I think education is tricky. now in this new communication age with social media, I think even long format content like Spotify or YouTube is becoming slowly outdated.
Right.
And now we have the short bursts of dopamine, right? TikToks going on, and so the whole narrative of or the whole strategy of communication strategies have evolved. Um, so the question is, the youth that may help us develop this communication methods, they don't have the knowledge to do that.
You know, we're going into an area of communications that I'm unfamiliar with. So, just from a demographic point of view, I was born before any of those things were issues. And I'm making a commitment to people that I am not going to do a dance on a TikTok video or sing about ankle power. This would not be helpful to the industry. So, I might be a good singer, but no, you're right. We do need to sit down and think about how to do it. You will know from our previous discussions, I am a huge supporter of getting our community of experienced nuclear people into their communities to talk to their communities. I think that has a number of benefits. One is people, trust is already there. If somebody who works in a nuclear plant goes and talks to their hockey team about what they do at the nuclear plant, that's a very important part of the education, and they're going to be trusted when they do that. So I'm very keen on expanding out from just a few communicators carrying messages to trying to arm lots of people to go out and talk about what they do and to build up that level of understanding. But that still hits a relatively small group of people. So we do need to think about, getting nuclear issues back into the classroom. So I tell the story about my daughter. It's a bit old now, and she's a bit older than she was when this happened. But she did when she was around, I guess, 13. They did a class on energy, and they taught her about wind and solar. And I said, now would you like to know how 60% of the electricity is produced rather than 7% of the electricity is produced? So the problem with having curricula like that, where nuclear power isn't mentioned, is that there's a class of people that have moved up that only think about wind and solar as a way of producing electricity. So we've got to get nuclear back into the classroom, get people to understand it. So that's another area that we do it. And then, I think then we need to talk to the communications professionals about how we educate people that have missed our class, didn't learn about it the first time, and are in this big mass of people in the middle who really don't understand the technology. And, bluntly, they're not interested in it. It doesn't affect their day-to-day life. So we've got to make it interesting enough for them to want to learn about it and then to teach them about it. And it's a good question. We need to sit down and work out how we do that.
Absolutely, it's not as easy as it's not easy, right? Like
It's not easy.
we can fund it, but it's not easy.
But the upside is, going back to what I said right at the beginning, is for the first time in a long time, people are listening to us.
Yeah.
And so, it really is a great opportunity while we have them interested to get out there and get the message out to them. As I said right at the start, not promoting nuclear power, because they'll discount that if we send out people that have a vested interest, which is what typically we do during engagement, because there's a project they're engaging about. So we need to get to them before that. So I think many people have heard me say we need to educate before we engage, because by the time you engage, people are polarized and they've made their decision, on false information because we never educated them. So that's where I want to put the focus, not on we've got a project we want to sell to you, but you should know about nuclear in general, as it's important to our modern society. I think it's really important to differentiate between nuclear waste in general and the subset of it of used fuel, because they're very, very different things. And whilst used fuel is a nuclear waste covers a whole load of other things. And it means that you have to make very generic statements when you're talking about nuclear waste. but you can make very specific statements when you're talking about used nuclear fuel, because it is effectively quality assured. You know exactly what it is. And so you can be very definitive about the things we're dealing with it. And also waste is a bad thing, right? So you're already tarring it with a bad brush. You may have heard me again trying to rebrand used nuclear fuel in the light of something I saw the car industry doing, and that is to stop calling it used nuclear fuel and call it previously loved fuel.
Previously loved fuel. Nice.
So that's my objective. By 10 years time, I want people to be talking about previously loved.
Okay, I actually like that statement.
I'm not totally serious about. But used fuel, I think it is useful to call it used fuel because that's what it is, right? I don't like the term spent fuel, even though that's the IAEA language, because it isn't spent. There may well come a time when we go back to recover things from it, but it has definitely been used, and it is because it is used that it is an issue that is dealt with in the way that it is. So I'm a big fan of the used nuclear fuel, not calling it nuclear waste, calling it used nuclear fuel.
Nice. Well, yeah, I think that's a great way to brand and brand nuclear fuel. Well, I really had an amazing conversation. I think this was a pretty great conversation. Thanks again for your time.
It's
And
a pleasure. It's always great to chat with you. It encourages me to be a little more passionate than I am in some of my other discussions.
absolutely. So there you have it, Neil Alexander. In the description below, you can find more information about the Canadian Nuclear Society, as well as contact information for Neil Alexander if you'd like to reach out to him. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.